So session 5 is the cute and cuddlies, so no warts on these ones. We're going to kick off with Wendy Wright and Cassey Briggs. Wendy's from Fed Uni and Cassie's from Zoos Victoria, and they're going to talk about the return of fire affected koalas to East Gippsland.
Thanks everyone. I'd like to add my acknowledgement of the Gunner Kurnai and pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to acknowledge everyone who's come today to share their stories. It's been wonderful to listen to, and thanks to the organisers as well. I'm really honoured to represent an amazing team of people who've worked on this project, a team of people brought together by Leanne Wicker, Senior Vet at Zoos Victoria. So I feel very much that I'm speaking on behalf of the team, including Cassey, who's going to help me out here as well. Cassey has a dual role. She's a PhD candidate at Federation, but she took leave over the summer to work on this project with Zoos Victoria. So I just want to tell a story about a few koalas, really. That's what we're talking about today. And to set the scene, as many of you know, over the 2019-20 fire season, there was a lot of animals injured. About 300 animals, I'm told, were assessed at the bushfire triage units that were set up, and about 75% of those were koalas. 35 koalas were relocated to DELP registered wildlife carers or to specialised hospitals at Zoos Victoria, Phillip Island nature parks and around the place. Now, I can only speak from here on about the koalas that Zoos Victoria were taking care of. And of those, 14 of them were assessed as being ready to return to the wild about a year later. So this is their story. This is the story about those koalas. So we had the triage. We had those koalas evacuated. They were in intensive care in the hospital, and the slides aren't changing. Or are the slides changing? Here we go. So yeah, so we had the evacuation, intensive care in the hospital, and then assessed as being ready to return for release. And at that stage, they were fitted with radio tracking collars so that they could be intensively monitored for the first weeks after their release. So what did we want to understand with these koalas? What we wanted to do was really watch them, see how they went when they were released back into the wild. What you might be surprised is it's very little known about what happens when we re-release animals back into the wild after they've been injured in such, or most of them are either orphaned or injured, and we just don't know what happens. So this is one of the very first projects to do that, to really monitor what goes on for these animals. And the project is in 3 stages. So we've already had stage 1 and stage 2, and we're about to launch into stage 3. Stage 1 was really that immediate post-fire veterinary care, the rehabilitation of the animals, and then making sure, watching their behaviour, watching their health, making sure that they were ready to be re-released. Stage 2, Cassey was heavily involved in, and she's going to tell you about that bit, which was between November and April. And that was the release of the animals back onto country and tracking them, really intensively tracking them. And then stage 3, what's next, is what I'm sort of going to be involved with. And this is ongoing monitoring of the individuals and the populations that they've been reintroduced into. And we're going to do that using non-invasive genetic studies. But I'll let Cassey talk to you about the stage 1 and stage 2.
Thanks, Wendy. That's my slide, sorry. 14 koalas were deemed healthy and well enough to be released back into the area that they came from. 6 went back to Glantapy and 8 went back to Malakuta. As Wendy mentioned, they were all fitted with radio collars so that we could track them for a period of 16 weeks after their release. Monitoring included documenting things such as their location, their general behaviour, like were they eating, were they sleeping, what species of tree they were using, as well as checking just on their general well-being. Fecal collection was also done at regular intervals. This was done non-invasively at the base of the tree, and these fecal samples will be analysed to determine if there was any changes in gut health and stress hormones after their release. Hands-on veterinary health checks were also done 1 month after their release, and again at 4 months after their release when collars were also removed. And this allowed for hands-on health examinations, disease screening, blood tests, and their weight to be taken. So these are the released koalas. They first entered care in January 2020, and they spent 10 months in care recovering and undergoing rehabilitation before they're released back into the wild. The top 6 koalas here were from released back into Glantipy, which included 2 males and 4 females, 2 of which were adults, which were Emily and Sky, and 4 were sub-adults. The bottom 8 were the koalas released back into Malakuta. These were all adults and included 2 males, Frankie and Leafy, and the remaining were all females. So throughout the tracking period, we observed a diversity of movement patterns, which is consistent with what has been previously observed in other translocations of koalas in Victoria. Most of their big movements occurred within the first 4 to 5 weeks before they settled down. Most of them tended to settle down within their environment. A variety of different tree species were utilised by the koalas at both locations, both food and non-food trees. The distances that they travelled from their release site also varied, ranging from around 500 metres up to 7.3 kilometres. And some examples of their movements can be seen in the images on the right. The top image shows the movements of Emily and Toby at Glantipy. Each dot represents their daily logged location, and Emily's movements are represented by the red dots and Toby's represented in the blue. As you can see, they've 2 very different koalas in terms of their movement. Right after release, Emily headed north quite rapidly, about 6 kilometres from her release site, and settled in there, whereas Toby never really moved from 500 metres from her release site. The bottom image shows the movements of Sky and Toby. Sky's movements are in the purple, Toby's in the blue again. Sky was also different in her movements. She initially settled in her environment where she was released, before about a month later she decided to go up and on a move, and then she's ended up in that corner, in this, where is she? She ended up here in this pocket of nice manna gum and in the middle of a paddock, let's go figure, but which was about 2.5 kilometres from her release location. So at the end of 16 weeks at Glantipy, Toby, Rain and Sky are all in good health. Toby and Rain had neonate joeys in their pouches, which is a little bit exciting, even if it is a little bit of a teenage pregnancy. Unfortunately, Rivers, Jeremy and Emily were euthanised at different stages along the way due to declines in their health. Preliminary findings suggest post-release impacts on kidneys contributed to 2 of the cases, but evaluation of necropsy reports and disease screening is ongoing. At Malakuta, almost all the koalas were in good health, all but one, which was Trip, who was unfortunately found deceased at week 12. Unfortunately, her cause of death remains unknown due to post-mortem predation before necropsy evaluation could be done. On a good note, Blinky, Annie and Solo all had neonate joeys in their pouches, which is again exciting news and nice to know that they're contributing to the population at Malakuta. Now, I'll quickly pass you on to Wendy to finish things off.
So I think we're out of time.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
No, that's fine. So I might just say that the work that Federation University is going to continue is really looking at the samples that Cassie mentioned had been collected, and just looking to see the ongoing contribution of these animals in their populations. And we'll just leave it at that. Thanks.